Good afternoon, Sandy.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, how are you? How's the week been
Yeah,
going?
yeah, good. We
Good to
close
hear
to
it. Yeah.
release.
Close to you?
Release 4 looks good.
It's great news. Can't wait to
Yeah,
try it
lots
out
of testing
myself.
still to be done.
Hmm. Okay, so for now, we're still pulling from the RC branch. We don't have the
Uh,
4 on Docker Hub yet.
I think Justice is planning the release of 4 for tomorrow. So there's Justice. You can ask him
Well,
to
hello there.
confirm. Hello.
What is
Hey,
the question on the
Justus.
floor?
Uh,
Rodney wants to know.
Tazama 4 on Docker Hub.
Yes, coming soon to a Docker Hub near you. So
That's
at the
good enough, but
moment,
hmm.
most of the RC containers that are on Docker Hub are going to become the release containers, right? So it's fairly stable. We've done all of the library version bumps. We've done pretty much all of the Dependabot stuff we were going to do, although it looks like Axios had a conniption today. There's about 5 high severity CVEs that we probably want to get in for the release as well. And they're sitting in the FRMS COE lib, which is a pain because then I have to version bump everything again. Um, but yeah, the RC at the moment is the version that we're most likely going to go out with. Why are you asking? Do you need them or are you looking to see what the end result's going to look like?
Just the end result. Wanted to
Yeah.
pull and try stuff out.
What I would recommend is the full stack has also been updated to version
Mm.
4. Um, so when it now deploys all of the containers from Docker Hub, it'll deploy them as version 4 containers, especially the rules. It matters more for the rules than anything else. The network map and the configuration and everything that is in the full stack is also bumped to a version 4 network map. And the full service configuration in the TMS configuration repo on FRMS COE is also bumped to version 4. So we're basically kind of ready. We just need to push the big red button, but Kyle is still building the button. So we're hoping to get everything out tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Sounds terrifying if you ask me. Hi, Dom.
Hello, hello. Good evening or good afternoon.
How are you today?
Yeah, good, good.
Guys, I
How
want
are
to
you
show you something
guys?
that Dom
Uh,
did, or that Dom inspired.
Thank you.
Let me
I'm
show you.
touched.
I was very excited about this, like yesterday when I created this. Hang on. We now have curl configuration via curl via the admin service API, which is also topical for our Helm approach, because ultimately, once you have now done your deployment, as we agreed, as the first step, you will then do configuration as the follow-up step. And you can still, if you want to, do that via Postman, but you can, if you like, do this via curl. All of the configurations are now in JSON files that you can upload via the admin service API straight up. The curl commands here also account for the authentication processes around that. I tested these bash scripts on my side and they seemed to be working. Very exciting. Cool. Thanks, Dom.
Oh, you're welcome. But thank you too. Well, I have a question though. So,
Yes,
these commands are applied to version 4.
yes,
Okay. All right.
yeah,
So basically, from what I understand so far, you're releasing a new full stack Docker for version 4 tomorrow, and then we can use this one to test that one as well.
yes. And then I
Okay.
think the full stack Docker, let me just go there as well so that you can see. Um, the full stack Docker has also been sort of mostly refreshed. I've updated or refreshed the bash scripts or the shell scripts that run it for people on Mac or Linux. So there's the three folders, core, extensions, and BAR, which is essentially the three domains or the three server domains. So each one of these has its own little batch script. So if you run the batch script here, Tazama core, bat, or Tazama core shell, then you'll get into that deployment menu where you can choose the options that you want to use for your deployment. And all of that deploys out of these Docker Compose files here, the master file, and then you'll update your environment variables here. So essentially, when we're looking at superimposing a Helm process on top of that, we're more or less going to do the same thing. The Helm chart, which is the Docker Compose equivalent, I guess, and then the values files, which are the environment variable equivalents for a particular deployment. And you'll also be deploying that in three separate parts. There's going to be the core engine. Then there's going to be the extensions, which is the case management system. And in addition to that, there are some additional services. So if we look at the extensions YAML here, the connection studio, the rule studio is being deployed here. The rule studio and the connection studio actually get deployed onto server A alongside the other services that uses the admin service API. But these are likely going to be development environment deployments. So we'll need to think about how we deploy different configurations of the system or the platform for different environments like dev or QA or so on. And then the case management system gets deployed here, voila, which is the wrapper for Jupyter notebooks that embeds visualizations inside the case management system. That all happens out of the extensions. And then the last one is the BIAR here, which is the Business Intelligence Analytics and Reporting area, which is almost entirely an Apache data lakehouse stack. So you can see that here, the infrastructure is Ozone and a whole bunch of other stuff. Spark, Tika, Solar, more Ozone, more Ozone. This is a heavy lift. We were actually quite surprised. NiFi is going in here. When we deployed the BIAR the first time, we actually ended up having to provision a much bigger server than both the core engine and the case management system combined. Is massive. So that's also something to keep in mind. At some point, we're going to have to come around to try and benchmark the system requirements for all of these components now. We had in the beginning of the project with along with Cybran, Rodney is here in the call. Rodney was also part of that team where we did a performance benchmarking on the core engine only. And we were able to clock that core engine up to about 2,750 evaluations per second. And that was when it was still using ArangoDB. We think the performance on Postgres is better. And Postgres is also far more mature. So the scaling and the clustering on Postgres is a solved problem, more or less. So if we ever had to do performance benchmarking again, we might end up with better performance. And I'm pretty sure Rodney would definitely not want to be involved in another project like that ever again.
I wouldn't agree with that. It's still fun, you know.
Yeah, it was a great project. Good. Okay, so today, right, where did we end off last week? We built a little bit of a process to just go through sort of overall the components and the scope of what we're going to be doing here, getting an understanding of how all of these components get together. Something that I thought might be useful for today is talking about what our definition of done for this exercise actually looks like. Festus gave us a bit of a heads up here, which is actually a fairly good place to start. But there's also, I think, a definition of ready. So, is there a way that we can validate the infrastructure that we're going to be using in either sort of like a checklist fashion or even through some sort of automated routine to say that, yes, the system is ready to receive a Tazama deployment. So I think that there's like maybe a little bit of work that we can do there. But also then on the definition of done, what will it look like when we publish our Helm chart process? What are all the things that we think we need to include? And I don't want to do too much of the talking. But does anybody have sort of any observations about the work to date or anything like a feeling about next steps or anything like that? Let me add a new comment here, so.
Did we end up making a decision on whether we're gonna package the Helm artifact? Because I think that would be a good place to start, because that would influence documentation on how you get the actual deployment kicked off through Helm.
Yeah. I think that's where we started our conversation last week. And then I don't know that we necessarily ended up on a decision because we ended up with this. My initial feeling was that packaging it is almost optional because it doesn't change anything, right? If you want it packaged, you can package it yourself straight off the source, right? We don't necessarily add any specific benefit to hosting the package on the registry. And I think maybe it's like, if anybody has a view, Rodney, and especially because you proposed it, how do you feel about packaging and what are the benefits that we can expect to get out of it?
I think the biggest one on my end is we get like sort of like versioning going. So with the Git or the source code approach, we'll be going for like more of like a commit based approach. But if we do have an artifact, we can have maybe, let's say the first Helm artifact would be Tazama 4.0. And then if there's a 4.1 down the line, we could always just tell them use
Okay.
this particular Helm release,
I mean, that makes
But yeah.
sense because ultimately there will be a moving target, right? It depends. If you are taking the Helm charts out of the main branch, we are assuming that the main branch is the version that's going to end up in the package registry anyway. And the main branch is a low churn destination, right? We don't expect anything will end up in the main branch on an ongoing in-between releases basis, unless there's a critical vulnerability or a patch or a bug of some kind that we need to fix, in which case you're going to want to propagate that to the package registry anyway, right? But sure, it's easier for people to point to a package registry rather than having to go through a build process on their own. I mean, it does feel like maybe it makes it simpler for people. Rodney, have you used a package registry for Helm charts before? Or
Yes, we
anybody else?
have. Um, I think I gave an example for Elastic the last time around, but I think the Helm charts we currently have now do have what we call subcharts, which sort of like use already existing services as Helm charts. So they pull from them as sort of like dependencies. So yeah, I think they're still in use even through the Helm charts, which we currently have right now as subcharts. So that pulls from, already packaged artifacts.
Okay. Does anybody have a view? If we say, let's assume that we go with packages for now until that becomes either untenable or, we're vindicated. Is everybody comfortable with that? Or do we think we need to wait?
The Helm charts might make things easier, especially for the participants. Like they won't have to. Okay, if we don't provide the Helm packages, then that means if somebody wants to use Helm to do the deployment, they'll have to come up with a package there on their own, and it's something that may be repetitive with subsequent releases. And the Helm chart may just make that easier. Similar to how with the image, once the image is there, you just pull the image and you can get your services running without having to worry about how is the image built and such.
So that sounds like you're in favor of a package hosting on a package registry, Brian?
I am.
Okie dokie. 2 for 2. Dom, do you have a view?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of experience on Helm packages, so yeah, I don't have an opinion at the moment.
Okay, 1 abstention. Sandy?
Oh, I definitely don't know enough to have an opinion. Sounds as if it will make things easier. So depending on how much work it is, it seems like a good idea.
Right.
To the
I think to a
uninformed.
certain extent, you could probably automate some of this through a GitHub action anyway. So if you're merging stuff into main, you can probably publish automatically the same way that we do with the Docker Hub, in which case on an ongoing basis, there will be very little work. I don't think there's even going to be a lot of work up front to set that up. And I think if we use our current Docker Hub publishing process as an analogy or a template, we kind of do this already for our actual build images. So it's not that unreasonable to offer the same abstraction for our Helm packages. So by general agreement,
Funny
let's
enough,
do it.
they do supply a GitHub action. Well, I mean Helm as in they, which does just that. I'll drop a link in chat for anyone curious.
You're in the chat. Okay, here we go. Okay, cool. And that's on. Does Helm have their own registry?
They do, yes.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
it's
think
Called,
as
different from
a
like a container registry, like that
it's
we'd use
called.
for Docker images.
Brian.
Sorry, Brian.
Oh, okay. I just meant to say it's called Artifact Hub. But we could also use the GitHub registry to store the charts.
What is the default? At the moment, we store our NPM packages on GitHub. It creates some issues around authentication and personal access tokens and so on. If we were to use something, for example, like the NPM registry, some of those processes would be simpler. So what is the preferred destination?
I personally haven't had issues with the GitHub ones, but I think the Artifact Hub, which Brian raised, is the more commonly used one.
Okay, well, let's pick that one. I mean, it does seem kind of arbitrary, but I don't think we need to go through a massive or an exhaustive sort of a evaluation exercise. And it seems to be, it's the default, it's related to Helm already, which we're using, so it's not a departure from the ecosystem. I'm okay picking it until somebody says there's a very good, compelling reason not to do it, and then they are willing to migrate. Okay, happy with that. Right. Rodney, your decision
Yes.
has been made. Okay. Right. That, I guess, is then also part of the definition of done. So that'll be at the very end. These are some of the things that will be in place. Okay. What else do we think done looks like for this activity? The Helm chart's updated, I guess. I think that basically also looks at core. There must be deployment capabilities for all three of these. I don't think it makes sense to just give people the capability to deploy half the system. Should be all of it.
Okay, that does make sense to me.
Okay. What else?
Are you gonna look into the configuration of the deployed system, and then maybe a test to see if everything's working? I think sorry, I think Festus also mentioned that in his document.
Let's do that here. So we are actually saying that we are going to test. Okay.
Configure should probably come before test. Right? Or
Well, we're testing the deployment, and then we're doing a smoke
okay.
test.
All right. Yes.
I also feel like we should have, I don't know if it's an implicit versus explicit thing, but the level of documentation, I assume it's implicit, but I feel like every parameter and yeah, like your point there, should be documented. So anything you can configure through the values.yaml or what have you should be documented.
Great. I wanted to add something here around I think we need to define a deployment readiness check or a process of some kind.
Just to say, do you have a question regarding the BIAR? Because earlier you said that the resources to run this were also quite substantial. I mean, more than the core and the CMS.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, and I saw that it's mostly, or at least from what I scanned earlier, it was basically an Elasticsearch. Is that right? Or
No, actually, there's no Elasticsearch in here.
oh, okay, sorry, it's Wi-Fi.
Elasticsearch, maybe just as a heads up, is going to come back to a future working group because the ELK stack, which is, I think, is HashiCorp, right? Um, so HashiCorp are at the moment somewhat in and out of open source with their
Ah,
BSL license, right?
right.
So they are currently they actually wrote it, I believe. And the BSL license is not ideal, but also so much so they got so much pushback for it that they've actually gone back and walked back some of those licensing decisions early on. But either way, that made us shy away from the BSL license a little bit because that license for me is always on the edge of commercialization. So it could go hard into commercialization at any moment. And they have done that in the past. So we're a little bit wary of it. The alternatives would probably be something like open telemetry and open search. And so there are alternatives for that. But we're probably going to be exploring a proper logging and observability infrastructure in a future working group in the next couple of months. So what we currently have for Elasticsearch is perhaps somewhat stale. And if you had deployed Tazama recently, you would have noticed that it's not actually even being deployed. I don't even know if we have the Docker Compose files for those currently, but they're certainly not triggered during the scripted process. I'm not even entirely sure if those deployments currently work with release 4, so we haven't attended to that at all. What we have in the BIAR is a proper data lakehouse for the operational management of the system. So, and it's a lakehouse because it is somewhere in between a data lake and a data warehouse, and specifically geared also for AI and machine learning. So we have a vector database in that stack, although that is not currently actively being populated, but the intention for that extension exists. Most of what is in the data lakehouse is built around Jupyter Lab. So all of the data transformation layers from raw, and it follows a bronze, silver, gold transformation, layered transformation architecture for the data lakehouse. So all of those layers are accessed from Jupyter Lab, and then you can create Jupyter notebooks in Python that can generate reports. And some of those reports are embedded inside the case management system through Voila, right? So the purpose of the data lakehouse is for analytics, reporting, business intelligence, AI and machine learning capabilities, and so on. It is not the observability infrastructure. That is something that we're going to be dealing with in the next few months. Does that help?
Yes, it does. But I have a follow-up question there. So the data lake house, where is it fed from? Is it fed from the Postgres database or from NATS or somewhere else?
That is a good question, and I'll tell you why in a sec, right? So the data lakehouse is fed from both Postgres databases. The core engine has its own locally hosted database that is dedicated specifically to the evaluation engine. The case management system has its own separate Postgres instance, right? And the reason for that is we don't want people in the case management side to run queries on the high performance, high scale production database for the evaluations, right? That database is very performance sensitive, so we want to preserve the performance as much as we can. But what that also means is when the data lakehouse is fetching data from the core engine's database, we don't want it to use the production store, the ODS. So there is in the infrastructure layer, and there will have to be Helm charts for this in production, you actually have to create a replica, a clustered replica of the core engine's operational data store that can stage the data for the data lakehouse. Now, that is not how the full stack works. The full stack, we didn't go to those lengths because it's just a demo system. It's not supposed to have the same kind of performance demands. But in a production deployment, you are going to have to create a Postgres clustered replica that can trickle data from the ODS to the data lakehouse. And that's something to write down somewhere because that's something we need to remember.
Well, actually, where I'm really coming from is the BIAR with all the components you just mentioned. Can it be optional? As in, I
Yes.
can. Yes. All right.
I'll tell you now.
Mm.
I'll put up a presentation quickly. Let me just make a note.
Also, maybe one thing to add on the infrastructure layer, having listened to having seen that we have the three different parts, the core extension and BR, maybe it would also make sense to configure node pools for those when setting up your Kubernetes clusters. You would not want workloads, your BI workloads maybe running somewhere where you also have some core services applications running.
Right. So now that here is right. And I agree with you entirely. How we go about that is going to be interesting because we at the moment have 6 Helm repositories, right? I don't want to end up with something like 18, where every one of these has a core and a extensions and a BIR. So ideally we would want to find a way where you can select the component you want to deploy, and the Helm charts and the process that we are following needs to sort it out, right? I'm not sure what that would look like, but I would almost want to say here, I don't know how to actually describe this as a like a requirement here, but let's say as few charts as possible, right? So that the options are handled logically, not physically, if that makes sense. Okay, let me put this on the screen here quickly. Right. So this is our deployment. So ideally here, you can deploy, let me draw this out. Here we go, pen. All right. The core engine and this, actually, that, and that. That is currently what we deploy as core, right? And these, I think, are the minimum essential components for Tazama to be Tazama, right? If you don't have these things, then it's not really Tazama. The next piece here is the case management system itself. We consider a optional component. So in theory, if you have your own case management system, you can intercept the connections here into your own case management system, and then you can build your own dashboards and workflows and everything else around that. You don't have to use the Tazama case management system. But this component here is then theoretically optional, right? I would almost say that if you are not using the case management system, this becomes a lot more viable, a lot less viable, right? Because the integration and the reporting and everything else that exists here is built on the assumption that it's getting data from the case management system about reporting outcomes. So you're going to have to kind of split the reporting here down the middle to say that there is now separate core reporting and CMS reporting. And we haven't done that, right? So if you're not taking the case management system, then you'll have to either refactor all of the reporting in here to be able to handle the absence of the case management system, or you're basically not using it at all, right? So for me, it's like, yes, you can have the case management system and or you can have the BIAR, but I would almost say that these two things go together. You're not taking one or the other. You're either taking both or you're just taking the case management system and then you've got your own data lakehouse. But then you have to do the integration for that, right? These components here are optional by virtue of their change control location. Let's put it that way. These are dev grade components, right? So these components need to be optional anyway, because you don't want to deploy them into a production environment. You're only going to deploy them into a dev or a QA or a UAT environment or pre-prod or whatever. So these ones have to be optional anyway. So there are basically then 4 groups of components that you would then deploy. Does that answer the question, Brian? You have a follow-up?
It's okay. It's clear.
All righty. Kidoki. So that also probably means then that the core, there is another component here, which is the dev tools. So the dev tools typically end up as part of core because they use the same interfaces. But if you're deploying in a distributed environment in Kubernetes across a number of different places, that doesn't really matter as much as it does when we are doing this on the full stack, where we are trying to minimize the number of servers that we are running on. You need at least 3 servers. But in an actual environment, these dev tools can live anywhere. In theory, you can spin them up when you need them on a developer's local machine, as long as they can connect to where they need to go. But yes, you may want to run it as sort of an enterprise, kind of like a cohesive development instance of some kind. Okay. What else have we got for the definition of done?
How about the rules? Are the rules a separate entity there under Helm charts updated / refreshed, or are they folded into one of the others?
That is a very, very good question. Because we always think of them as part of core, right? And there are two sets of rules. There's what we call the public rules, right? And then there are the private rules. I would say that the private rules should always be included, but you should have the option of excluding them because of this here. And so there's the private rules are here. But then you also have your custom rules, right? Let's call these private Tazama rules, right? Let's just call them Tazama rules because whether they're private or not doesn't really matter. And then you're going to have custom rules, right? So the custom rules, if you are a system integrator and you're implementing Tazama, you may actually choose to deploy the system with a whole batch of rules that you have specifically developed for your customer, right? And they would come out of your own GitHub. You may want to compile them with Jenkins or whatever it is, and then you deploy them, right? How does the Helm chart cater for that? And that is one component, right? The custom rules probably also have custom TMS API because you may be implementing specific data flows in support of your custom rules. You may want to start feeding in customer onboarding data or KYC data or device information or a whole bunch of other biometrics or user-based behavioral data. And you may be extending the TMS API to hard code new rails for yourself. But you may also deploy the Tazama Connection Studio data rails, right? And the Tazama Rule Studio rules. No, customer, custom. I almost want to phase this where this is priority phase 1. This is, I'm not sure which of these would be phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3. We are trying to create these rails or these tools to make hard-coded customization unnecessary. So I'd almost want to say that I want to encourage people to do that rather than carry on hard coding things. And the way that we would do that is by making it easy to deploy them. And then this for me would be a phase 3, right? How does that sit with you guys? How do you feel about this? I see. Thumbs up. Okay, thank you. All right. I love this process, guys. Grill me. Every question you're asking me adds more
Question.
work to the list.
I've got just a thing for your question. Nice. Okay, so how much are we saying we also want to ship the infrastructure with this? So I mean like Valky and Postgres. I'm just thinking of the case whereby maybe someone has their own AWS hosted Postgres, for example, or they don't want to use like our Valky, but something compatible with Valky, like a drop-in replacement. Do we want to allow for that, or is that out of scope for the Helm charts? Like an example would be maybe let's say Postgres, well maybe like Redis and Valky, as I mentioned, but in the term of like a database, I think maybe Brian's familiar with Kona DB, which was sort of like a variant of MySQL, and you also get MariaDB and all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm just wondering if those kind of variations are something we need to keep in mind, or just standard Postgres.
I'm going to say the answer is in our architecture, right? Purely because all of those components are unfortunately closely coupled, right? With Valky Redis being the notable exception because the version of Valky that we are using, when we started using it, was a direct drop-in replacement for Redis itself, right? But only as far as the package library is concerned, right? So or the actual the server, because I don't know if you'd ever noticed this. Let me show you here, right? Let's go to. There's work we need to do here. So there's Redis is over here. In the TMS service, we use a little bit of Redis and dependencies.
There it is. Yeah.
Right. So we have implemented the Valky infrastructure, right? The actual server, but we haven't actually changed the dependency in our code yet. So this is also at some point going to come up at a future TSC. It is in the backlog at the moment, but we have Redis still very closely coupled in the code. In theory, we can change this to Valky, right? Because it's a neat drop-in replacement. But we will have to do some regression testing to make sure that it is actually clean, right?
Okay.
And at some point, Valky and Redis are going to diverge, and then we will no longer be able to use the Redis keywords in all of our code, or we may lose certain functions, or we may want to leverage new Valky functionality that departs from Redis functionality, or whatever the case is. So this migration still has to happen. But this is kind of the case in point, right? Whether it's Valky or whether it is whether it is Postgres or whether it is NATS, none of those components are loosely coupled. They are effectively baked into, they are abstracted to a certain extent, but they are not decoupled. So at the moment, we actually don't have the capability to replace them or swap them out. And on that basis, I would say there's no real value in the short term in making it easy in Helm. Where are we?
So
Another update. Okay, sorry.
Brian, good.
Okay, and to say another angle, you could also look at the point Rodney is also raising is it could be that you also have existing deployments elsewhere, and we may not necessarily need to deploy it afresh. Postgres, for example, you may find teams that maybe want to run their DBs on-prem and connect to it from connect to the DB. Okay, connect to a standalone DB that's not deployed maybe via Helm. And so it would be nice to at least support that option, to make it like option to make the deployment of some charts optional. And I think we have Helm file that can at least assist with that.
So to say you're still deploying Postgres, I mean, not deploying, but you're still using Postgres, but not the one that is coming with Tazama. So like, no thanks, I've got my own Postgres, which I'll point to,
Yeah, a
if
lot of
that makes
financial
sense.
institutions actually have internal pinned versions for software that they use. They may not have vetted Postgres 18 in their infrastructure yet, so they're not allowed to use it. They have to use Postgres 17, for example.
So then would the way around that to be the minimum supported Postgres version is whatever there?
Yeah, and that sounds like work that we would need to sort of like do, right? We may have to test. I don't know if I want to do that. Just because of just the sheer number of permutations and combinations of software and versions and dependencies we have. I mean, Tazama has hundreds of direct dependencies on other software and specific versions. We have, for example, something as silly as ESLint and Prettier and all of those kind of like code quality tools. We have not bumped those to the latest version because it's a breaking change. And those utility dependencies have a absolutely massive impact across our system. And that's effectively just for code quality. So there are other things where we would bump them if there is a critical vulnerability, a high CVE, medium and high. Then we may risk a breaking change, but generally we avoid them. So, we can perhaps say our core infrastructure dependencies, we can experiment with a number of different versions, but how far do we go? Do we just leave the other packages alone? Rodney?
Sorry, this was just so I don't forget, but I do have another thing we can add to the definition of done.
Yeah.
I think we also need to have a list of the components which we want to be externally accessible from the particular cluster you deployed on. So I'm imagining something like the admin service, the TMS, the rules don't need to be, but that sort of thing.
Hang on a sec. This might be a reference. So we had to do this for setting up our. Oh no, that's not where I want to be. I'm in the wrong branch. That's why. We did that when we set up our AWS environment. So we had to choose the things that are accessible outside the network. I would almost want to recommend these as a starting point, and then we can whittle it down from here. Is that a sort of like a...
That does look like exactly what I was talking about, yes.
Okay, let me add that here. I keep on losing the page. I have too many tabs open. That should be under here almost, right?
Yes.
Right.
And what service will we use to achieve that? Is it Nginx or do you have another service in mind?
Will that be a function of the environment that you're operating in? Because we don't necessarily prescribe that, right? So will that come with your AWS or your on-premises or, that's the load balancer basically on AWS, for example, the ALB. Which component will make that decision in your environment?
Okay. Okay, I'm looking back at the setup we did. We still had a cloud load balancer that was that connected. Okay, in the cluster, within the cluster, we also had a load balancer that was being served or supported by the Nginx, so Nginx controller. And then now I think that was actually the load balancer we were using.
Okay.
And then,
It's
okay,
like,
for the Nginx, it was just a Helm chart, but you could replace that with something.
is that a Helm chart or sort of like a infrastructure provisioning thing, an IAC thing? Because like we've we don't have that as part of Tazama, if that makes sense. It's sort of external. Unless Rodney, I'm
Yeah, yeah,
mistaken.
okay.
Yep, it is external. So you can configure it in a neutral way that most of the English controllers can use. But that's, I guess, that's where the documentation will also factor in.
So the ingress controller here is part of the readiness check. That needs to be in place.
Yeah. It's what will support the exposing services, the service that will be exposed.
How do you spell Nginx? I'm never sure.
Although,
Nginx, like that, yes.
okay, in Kubernetes, Nginx is also being deprecated. So maybe
wow, okay.
something to consider for the next working group together with the Elasticsearch.
But I'm assuming then if Kubernetes is deprecating it, they have already a replacement in mind.
Yeah, yeah, the API gateway, Kubernetes API gateway.
Okay. Where did we? I wanted to make a note here. It was related to what you were talking about, Rodney, and I can't remember what it was now.
If people have their own specific deployments.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fine. We're not accommodating any component swap outs, not in our Helm charts. I mean, if people want to fork it and they want to wire up their own database, they're more than welcome to do that. No, there was something after that. I can't remember. There's a recording, I think.
There's a recording, yeah.
I can ask
Is
the
it on the
recording.
versions?
Right. We are at time. Can I ask if anybody thinks of anything else that we need to include here in our definition of done? Won't you please add it as a comment? And then we can also discuss it as a comment. So if you think about something later that you think we should be considering here, just reply to this with a comment. Let me just, who's all here? Oh, exactly the same people. Welcome back. Thank you very much, everybody. I think that's our session for today, unless anybody has anything else that they want to cover. Alrighty. Thanks, everyone. Add your comments if you can think of anything, and then we'll see you again next week.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thanks
That's
all.
all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.